Battle Through the Heavens, Grand World. Chapter 269 Intruder. In the boundless sea of trees, Xiaoyan was running at full speed in the forest. Relying on his powerful soul energy, he soon felt an invisible pressure filling the forest. Thinking about it, this should be the great formation protecting the Yunluo Academy. After flying for a while, Xiaoyan raised his head and looked over. At the end of his sight, there was a huge courtyard with an imposing aura that stood in the depths of the forest. At a glance, it seemed as if his mind would be immersed in it. Yunluo Academy. Xiaoyan blinked his eyes and calmed his excitement. After pondering for a moment, he found a huge rock and sat down cross-legged. He was about to enter the academy, so he had to maintain his best condition. He couldn't delay the Xiaoao's injuries any longer. When he was talking to Yuan Tianmu, Xiaoyan had also communicated with the Xiaoao for a while. The latter's injuries had already slightly eased up. After all, it was an injury that affected the source. Even with the Monarch Flame's mediation, it could not be recovered immediately. "How do you feel now?" Xiaoyan's mind was immersed in his body. He carefully asked about the Xiaoao. The latter's mind was not as active as before. It was curled up in the Monarch Flame, listless. Hearing Xiaoyan's voice, the Xiaoao slightly opened its eyes and raised its head to take a look. It muttered, "It's a little better than before, but I still feel a little uncomfortable." Xiaoyan frowned when he heard this. He himself could not explain the injuries in the Xiaoao's body. This kind of hidden illness was also the most troublesome. He took out a fragment of an eggshell and chewed on it as he ate. He muttered, "Although I don't feel that much pain in my body, I don't know why, but I don't have any strength in my body." After swallowing the eggshell in his mouth, the Xiaoao lifted its head. The monarch flame wrapped around its body disappeared. Xiaoyan's mind moved and he felt that he could control the monarch flame. How could this be? Xiaoyan once again placed his mind on the Xiaoao. His tone was filled with anxiety. The Xiaoao pouted and shook its head. A trace of seriousness flashed across its big eyes. It slowly said, "I am not sure. It is very likely that it has injured its origin. Right now, it is just feeling weak all over. It will not feel anything else. Don't worry." After a pause, the Xiaoao pondered for a moment before saying, "I'm not sure. It's very likely that it has injured its source. Right now, it's just feeling weak all over its body. It won't have any other feelings. This kind of situation, I think it has happened before. These few days, I will carefully recall. Perhaps I will discover something." After listening to the Xiaoao's words, Xiaoyan could only nod his head. With his current strength, he really could not be of any help to the Xiaoao. Swoosh! Suddenly, Xiaoyan frowned. His mind withdrew from his body. His eyes suddenly opened and he leapt. He had already left the place where he had sat cross-legged earlier. In the next moment, a few human figures had already rushed out from the forest. 4 men and 1 woman appeared. The 5 of them were wearing the same clothes. The leader of the group was a young man with a handsome face and a green longsword in his hand. He was staring at Xiaoyan with a pair of cold eyes. "Who are you?" The leader of the group looked at Xiaoyan vigilantly. The longsword in his hand buzzed slightly, as if it was going to let out a fierce attack at any moment. The 4 men behind him also had serious expressions on their faces. They stared at Xiaoyan with their eyes fixed on him. Their ki fluctuated. It was obvious that they were ready to fight. Xiaoyan fixed his eyes on the 4 men. He then nodded slightly and said, "Are you all from Yunluo Academy?" The leading man's face turned serious when he heard this. He said in a cold voice, "We are the punishment squad of the Yunluo Academy. We sensed something as soon as you entered this place. You don't have any proof of identity as a student of the Yunluo Academy on you, so why are you here?" "Identity certificate." Xiaoyan was slightly stunned. He nodded slightly and thought for a while. He took out the scroll that he had shown Yuan Tianmu and said with a smile, "The proof of identity. That thing really doesn't exist. This should be able to prove it." The young man looked over and grabbed the scroll that Xiaoyan had thrown over. He looked at it carefully and then raised his head. His eyes were full of doubt. He glanced at Xiaoyan and looked at him with confusion. The man handed the scroll to the 4 people behind him. After looking at it carefully, the 4 people shook their heads with solemn expressions. When the young man saw this, his expression suddenly turned cold. He fiercely gripped the scroll in his hand and coldly shouted, "Capture it and hand it to the captain for trial." Xiao Yan's originally smiling expression immediately became serious when he heard this. He was just about to speak when the 4 people behind the young man appeared and cried out explosively. The origin monarch ki within his body circulated wildly. A powerful aura soared into the sky and rushed towards Xiao Yan. Xiao Yan frowned. He was planning to fight a big battle when he sensed that the few of them were merely monarch spirit level experts. After thinking for a moment, the origin monarch ki circulating within his body calmed down. It was likely that these fellows were only outer court or inner court students with such weak strength. It was likely that they had only been in the academy for a very short period of time. They were not like old fellows like Yuan Tianmu, who could recognize this kind of training scroll. He had also heard the latter mention when he was conversing with Zhu Kun earlier. During these few years, the new students who had entered the academy no longer carried out the so-called training scroll trials. It was very normal that these little fellows did not recognize them. Thinking of this, Xiao Yan no longer resisted. He let them tie him up with a special rope. Anyway, he didn't know how he was going to meet the elders of Yunluo Academy. With these guys, the chances of meeting them would be much higher. Besides, these guys were only monarch spirit level warriors. If they wanted to harm him, it would be too naive to trap him with just the rope of a low-grade spirit weapon. Bring him to the captain. After easily trapping Xiao Yan, the young man in the lead coldly harumphed and waved his hand. A few of them then led Xiao Yan forward. How dare you invade the Yunluo Academy with just the strength of a monarch spirit? A short-haired young man who was walking beside Xiao Yan looked at Xiao Yan coldly and couldn't help but ridicule him. Xiao Yan looked at the former with an indifferent expression, and let out a bitter laugh. After pondering for a moment, he suddenly turned his head to the young man who was leading the group and said, "You're all students of the Yunluo Academy, right? Have you heard of that? Elder Fang. Elder Fang. There are so many elders with the surname Fang in the academy. Who knows who you are talking about?" Before the leader of the group could speak, the only female among the 5 snorted lightly and berated in a lovable voice. That's true. Xiao Yan shook his head when he heard that. He did not take the girl's rudeness to heart. As an expert, he naturally would not take these little fellows' rudeness to heart. Then do you know Zhu Kun or Guyuan? After pondering for a moment, Xiao Yan chuckled and asked again. The young man in the lead frowned and said with an expressionless face, "Of course I do. Senior Zhu Kun and Senior Guyuan are the legendary figures of the academy, and they are the top 50 experts in the Soaring Dragon ranking. But I'm warning you, you broke into the Yunluo's forest without permission. This kind of crime, even they can't plead for you." Hearing the cold tone of the young man, Xiao Yan couldn't help but smile and shake his head with a bitter smile. He didn't want them to plead for him. Xiao Yan sighed and didn't say anything. He just let them lead him to the deeper parts of the forest. Xiao Yan told me that he has gone to the Kangri group for a trip. I wonder how he is doing now. At the entrance of the Yunluo Academy, Ji Yuan and Zhu Kun were anxiously waiting. They had just returned from the other side of the forest with their students. They also knew about Xiao Yan. When Zhu Kun heard about Xiao Yan's whereabouts from Guyuan, he almost went berserk on the spot. What do you want me to say to you? Won't you stop me? Given Xiao Yan's character, he won't just kill a few small fries in the Kangri group. If he gets entangled by the emperor or monarch emperor and something bad happens, I want to see how you are going to explain it to Kai Lin and Xuan. Zhu Kun's face was gloomy as he kept criticizing Guyuan. Guyuan also frowned. After listening to Zhu Kun's words, he started to worry. He kept walking on the same spot with a serious expression on his face. Where did Jin Wei go? Zhu Kun threw a tantrum at Guyuan. He looked around and asked the students who were patrolling not far away. Reporting to the 2 seniors. Senior Jin Wei noticed that there was something wrong with the formation. An intruder has entered. He and the other seniors have gone to take a look. Hearing this, the student hurriedly replied. Intruder. Zhu Kun frowned when he heard this. He waved his sleeve and didn't speak anymore. This fellow was the most proactive when it came to dealing with matters in front of an elder. Let's wait a little longer. If it really doesn't work, I'll go and ask the elder. Xiao Yan is a saint-rank trial participant, they won't let him go. Guyuan hesitated for a moment, then he looked up at Zhu Kun and said in a deep voice. When Zhu Kun heard this, he nodded without any hesitation. Alright. Chapter end. Please guys like, comment, share, and subscribe.